The next speaker is Dr. Thomas Moser from the Swiss National Bank. The topic, it's a fireside chat. I enjoyed preparing for this, which was great fun. The chance to, chew the fat with a central banker. Who wouldn't want to do that if you're in the business we're in? It's the pros and cons of national digital currency from a central bank perspective. What do they think about? How do they prepare for this? And what's the impact on society? Now, nobody gets on stage without a little known fact. Well, some do if they choose not to. But the little known fact about Thomas is that he used to play in a hard rock band, and there's actually stuff on YouTube about him doing that. Now, helping Central Bank, the Swiss National Bank, please welcome Dr. Thomas Moser. I'm so going to Google that, you know that, don't you? I just want to see that.
Those were the 80s. Now, everyone who is young and wild as Bitcoin, back then in the 80s, everyone had a hard rock band.
Yeah, but that makes you an early influencer, right? Should have monetized that. Okay, so, wow. We were previously at the IMF. What role were you there, by the way?
I was an executive director. I was representing Switzerland, Serbia, Poland, and a couple of Central Asian countries.
So think about your role, and then when I look online, I see you meeting Bitcoin core developers, right? Trying to understand what they're doing to figure out, help figure out scaling and things like that. Where does this interest come from in yourself?
So one other secret, actually before I studied economics, I started studying computer science. That was also in the late 80s, but I only did 1 year and then I switched to economics. So there is already an affinity here. And then I got interested in probably 2013. I heard about Bitcoin. I started to read up on it and it fascinated me, the whole idea, and I have been following it ever since. And one interesting story about the IMF, about one of the previous panels said, about the BIS and the IMF, how slow they are. And they are slow, but I really saw a lot of change in the last 2 years. They invited me maybe like 4 years ago to give a dinner speech at the conference, mainly for emerging markets. And they told me I can talk about whatever I want. And I went there and I said, I talk about cryptocurrencies. And they looked at me and said, why would you talk about crypto? Who cares? And I gave that speech, and then apparently a lot of the participants from emerging markets went to them and asked them whether they could have more information, whether they could have my slides, and then they asked me if I could come back and give another talk about cryptocurrencies. So in the last 2 years, it has really, the BIS has now started this innovation hub, so it has really become a topic also in the established central bank.
Okay, so it was a personal interest as well, but it is wonderful that you're helping propagate some of the virtues and benefits. So let's drill down into it a little bit more. I mean, we had a great setup conversation, so I'm hoping some of that we can bring out here. What does a central bank need to think about when it's contemplating, a national digital currency? And then also, separate question, what do they need to think about when contemplating digital assets?
So I think the important thing is that there's this technical aspect, and there is also this economic impact and the policy aspect. And I think a lot of central banks talked about it. That they might think about a CBDC maybe like 2 years ago, and then they started to get into the economic implications and realized that this is really a bigger issue. And what happens to your financial system? What happens to your banking system? And here I think we had a little bit an advantage in Switzerland that we had this sovereign money initiative, where some of the implications, depending on how you design it, would be similar. So you have to ask yourself, if you issue a central bank digital currency, be it either in the form of an account, that everyone can have an account at the Swiss National Bank, or in the form of tokens, you have to ask yourself, what happens with the money that is now deposited at the commercial banks? Does that disappear? Does the funding disappear for the commercial banks? So these are all issues that have to be contemplated, not on the technical side, but really on the economic impact side. Even if you want to go there in the end, you have also to think about how do you go from A to B without causing a financial crisis on the way. Yeah. So I think that's one of the issues on the digital currency side. On the asset side, and here we are in the situation that digitization of asset progresses quite quickly in Switzerland. And the question there is, if these assets are traded, how do you do the cash side of the trade? And of course, one of the safety issues has always been that preferable settlement is done in central bank money, especially where you have large amounts of payments, because central bank money is the only money that has no credit risk and no liquidity risk. So you take out this risk, and so the question comes up, if you have now digital assets, for instance, traded on blockchains, how do you deal with the cash side? And I think stable coins are one of the answers that the industry comes up with, but stable coins have a counterparty risk.
They do.
It's not central bank money.
Well, we're going to come back to stablecoins, central bank inspired, backed, supported, endorsed, contemplated, all the versions of it. But do you, when you're thinking about this, think about your real-time global settlement system within the central bank and how it affects that? And does that actually need any change?
In what sense do you mean that?
Well, I remember when we did a roundtable with the Bank of England, and they were saying, okay, we have an RTGS. They were doing the same thing as you're doing, thinking about a national digital currency. And that's fine for internal markets, but it's the international settlement that's the question, right?
No, that's correct. I mean, I guess that's the big issue, but that's also where the big gains are. So I think cross-border payments, that's really very inefficient nowadays. I mean, several times it has been mentioned that sending an email from here to the US is relatively easy. If I make a payment, even from Switzerland to the US, it takes several days for it to arrive there. So I think central banks really have a task here to improve this. And then the question comes up, what do you do with this RTGS? Do you hook them up, or do you go through a blockchain in the future? Is there other technology available?
So, I mean, this question, which I wrote, is it more efficient to have a Swiss franc token on a blockchain?
So I think if there is an infrastructure, if there's a financial market infrastructure that uses a blockchain, because a blockchain is a more efficient way to do it, I think then it makes sense to have central bank money, which would be, in the case of Switzerland, a Swiss franc on the blockchain. And that's actually one thing that we are exploring together with SIX, because they intend to start a Swiss digital exchange, and they intend to go live by the end of this year already. And we are looking together with them into ways how we could provide a central bank digital currency, a Swiss franc, a digital Swiss franc, for that blockchain.
For that blockchain, for that purpose with SIX?
Only for that blockchain, for that purpose. It's a proof of concept at this stage that we are doing. We haven't promised to go live, but we are.
What a great experiment to be running.
Yeah.
If you had your druthers and it was successful, what would you expect to be the next step?
So this is for a very specific, it helps us to gain clearly insights in how do you design such a central bank digital currency, how can you use it. So, we are clearly open to also look into other use cases, but I think it's always important that you need to have a good use case for having a central bank digital currency.
There's something that puzzles me, and so forgive me for a layperson's question here, but a lot of the problems that caused the financial crisis were, not all, I admit, but some were caused by the centralization of currency control. A lot of them were. So is it possible, could we contemplate that we could reduce systemic risk in economies if central banks enabled individual companies to create and would back their own currency for a purpose, rather than trying to be the central currency?
So I think in the end, the fact that the national money is centralized in the sense that it's issued by the central bank, I don't think that's so much the cause for this crisis. It can be a cause of a crisis if there is not sound
inflation
not sound monetary policy. You have several cases of that. But we heard examples this morning. For instance, if you would have more data, more real-time data, with individual companies issuing their own currency. There's always the issue of is it then fungible? I mean, all the customers, they do not want to have just Apple currency where they can only buy Apple products. They want to have a currency that is usable, exactly, and usable.
But it allows loyalty and brands to. I mean, you kind of see that with air miles in a way, don't you?
No, exactly. You have several examples, but those are usually relatively small.
Sure. Yeah. So it brings the next question, which was an interesting one to contemplate. Will we ever see something like a digital special drawing rights?
That's an interesting question, because SDRs have been created already a while ago. I mean, I think it was 69, 67, something like that.
I remember it well.
Even before I was in a hard rock band. And it has never really become clearly an issue for payment or a reserve currency. And I think part of it is because it's only a unit of account, and digitization of it might so I was actually surprised that when Libra came out with their proposal that they wouldn't use SDR, for instance, as their basket. That's already something that exists. Yeah. One problem might be that since 2015 the SDR includes the Chinese renminbi, and there are some issues with full convertibility that you would have to work around, but I think you can work around these issues.
Yeah, with agreement it could be worked around. I want to move to your thoughts around security tokens and central banks' attitude towards them.
So it's not really a problem.
That was the right answer.
Central banks. So the only issue here is that, as I said, what we always worry about is how do you pay for these securities, and are there any risks involved in that payment? And then usually if there are a lot of payments done, if it's large volumes, then the preference, I think, of a central bank is always that it's settled in central bank money to have the least possible risk. So these are all the questions that come up then. If blockchain really take off, how do you get central bank money onto the blockchain?
The Swiss regulator was very helpful in being one of the first to define the types of token that you can have. It was incredibly helpful. That actually helped create, was one of the contributing factors towards the Swiss ecosystem becoming quite so vibrant and all that talent coming here. But am I right in saying that each canton has the right to impose their own types of rules? And do we see competition in that at all? In this field?
I mean, there are clearly some cantons and regions that are more interested in attracting the FinTech scene. Zug is a clear example. But this is all part of actually what this community likes, decentralization.
They love it.
You have competition, you have local solutions, and that actually enables, I think, also innovation, and competition leads to better results in the end.
It does. I mean, I must be honest, I was 3 years ago inspired to do more work in Switzerland because of something. One of the factors was a guy called Nicholas Nikolaisen, who's here, Bitcoin Swiss. He worked with the canton of Zug to help ordinary Zug inhabitants pay some of their taxes in Bitcoin. And I was absolutely, to be honest, I was inspired by that. That was pretty awesome. So asking you to think about the next step. If Zug wanted to issue their own currency, what would the approach be? No pressure.
Yeah. It depends a lot, I mean, how they do it. So when you look at the Swiss constitution and the law, what it says is that the Swiss National Bank has a monopoly on issuing banknotes. But for instance, in Switzerland, you have this private money called Wiel, which exists since probably the 30s or 40s, and I mean that's something that's allowed. So
could you just tell the audience a bit? A lot of international here. What is?
So this is a money that's issued by a private association, and there are firms that take them as payments. It's relatively regional, but it's a private money that has been issued since years, and we haven't had any problems with it.
Talk about pioneering work in Switzerland. That's wonderful. Okay, well, let's move then to the political landscape. That was perhaps a bit on the edge of sensitive. But what about the political landscape? We had the Schneider-Amann come here and stand on this stage and say the amazing words, it's not just Crypto Valley, it's Crypto Nation, which of course is a wonderful signal and it's great PR as well. And we love it. By the way, we lapped it all up. It was terrific. But what is the political landscape, and what are the things that have to be considered, especially by a central bank, when considering all of the things that we've discussed here today?
Mm-hmm. No, I think Schneider-Amann's attitude has been relatively representative. I mean, he started at ETH, so he's very pro-tech. But I think the Swiss approach has always been to be relatively open to innovation and to be open to competition. So in that sense, I think it leaves a lot of space for innovation and new models. But of course, there's always the issue then of customer protection, of anti-money laundering. That is an issue in this area. For the Swiss National Bank, I mean, we have been following what's going on more and more so. But I think for us, it's more has been more a benign neglect. I mean, we are not trying to fight it. We are trying to learn from it.
And actually, you're also launching some pretty serious initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have two initiatives. So one is the central bank digital currency that we will have for this Swiss digital exchange.
And
this is really something
that one
new.
For that purpose, for the exchange.
Yeah.
Is it the SDX? Then?
It's the SDX, correct? Okay. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of talk about central bank digital currencies. We heard this morning that might be different, but there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action so far. I mean, I haven't seen one central bank digital currency that is really a central bank digital currency. There has been claims that Tunisia has. If you look at them, the real test is it a claim on the central bank? Is it a liability of the central bank? And there's no digital currency out there to this stage that is. There will be, I'm sure, but so that what we do is still, I think, it's still a pioneer's work. The other thing that we did, and I think is quite interesting, is that we said that we would give. There was a lot of talk this morning that the FinTechs, especially when they deal with cryptocurrencies, have no access to banking services. So one thing that the Swiss regulator did, we have 2 banks in Switzerland that are crypto banks that are fully licensed. They have a bank license, so they can do regular legal business with crypto assets. And as a central bank, we also said that when a company has a FinTech license, which is like a banking license light, then we would give them access to the central bank. They would get an account at the central bank, and they would get direct access to the Swiss payment system. And that's very different from, for instance, from the European Union, where fintechs have to go through banks to get access to the central bank. And that should also increase the level playing field for competition for fintechs.
I mean, direct access is what fintechs dream of, and so that's actually very pioneering. It's also not so easy to pull off, is it? It's quite challenging. Is there a sandbox around that?
There's no sandbox around it. No, there are some certain limits on the business that they can do. But so far, unfortunately, I'm still waiting for the first FinTech license to be issued. I expected that to happen last year. I know there are some in the pipeline, but it will be interesting to see when we actually will have the first FinTech license.
I mean, we've seen the FinTech ecosystem rising in Switzerland, and so I think that it's a momentum thing, and it's also a regulatory thing. But I fully acknowledge, though, that it's also quite hard for a smaller regulator to have the people power necessary to actually think this through and come up with the right policy. Yeah. And so that's a challenge, the talent side of it.
It is a challenge, and I think in that sense, Libra, when they made the announcement that they would come to Geneva, I thought, oh, that's interesting. It might be, and I have always to be careful because I said that already in June at the Crypto Valley conference, and the headline was Swiss National Bank welcomes Libra, which caused some problems for me personally.
It's not exactly what you said.
It's not exactly what I said. But
there's a chance to put it right, just between us, no one else.
But I thought it was interesting. Maybe it will actually accelerate some of the legal issues that have to be done. And but I think the way I view it now, it is more negative, given the backlash that political people are more afraid now. They are more concerned what could happen. And also, I think it uses a lot of resources of our regulators dealing with Libra, that absorbs a lot of resources and I think that might be one of the reasons why no FinTech license has been issued yet, because they don't have the resources to deal with everything at the same time.
It is quite tough. I must admit, when I don't really want to lose people from the business side to the regulator, but if somebody's hiring and they're hiring good talent and they want it to go to the regulator, let them go, because it's better that the regulator has good people that really understand this business. You mentioned you can't really point to an example from around the world where it's actually in use, but I think that there are some countries that are going to be really pushing the edge and pioneering this space, mostly because they want to get around some kind of sanction or something like that is often the way. I mean, I'm not saying this is entirely the case because there's a lot of poor people in, say, Venezuela who don't have access. Now, what they tried to do was to launch the petro there, underpinned by the oil assets. Yeah. So, in a sense, a stable coin, in a sense. Of course, the first thing America did was write an executive order banning it. By the way, beautifully written executive order. It was amazing. I read it, and I was astounded at the granularity and understanding. Yeah. And then I met the lawyer who wrote it for the US government. So it was terrific work. But what do we think about that? Because financial inclusion is something we've heard about on this stage quite a lot. It's not necessarily a big issue in Switzerland, but around the world, it is. It truly is. So do we think, I mean, maybe this is your personal opinion rather than, you know, the opinion of yourself as a central banker. What is your hope for financial inclusion?
No, I think it is a big issue, and we heard several times today the number 1 billion. I think it's even more than that. It's more than 1.7 or something like that. And most of them have a mobile phone, so there should be some way to connect. But the other issue is that it's very costly for them to do transactions, and that's what I talked about before. If you make international transactions, it's amazing but how expensive they are, and there are a lot of flat fees involved, and if you have very small sums that you want to transact, it's almost prohibitively expensive. So I think it's very good idea to work on that, and if also the Libra proposal caused the central banks to do more to improve that and improve cross-border payments, make it more efficient, make it more inexpensive, I think that will be something that's really needed and will be helpful.
I think it'll be very welcome in the world, and it certainly will increase economic output for whatever country does that. So it's a good prospect. Thank you very much, and please put your hands together for Thomas for coming. And I have more gold for you guys.
Thank you very much.